Hi guys, this is Creative Cuts, a channel where I build, paint and create things. In today's video I'm going to take a trip deep into the jungle and build a diorama which takes you through some great ways to get some really lifelike vegetation. If you like these kind of build videos, then you can subscribe to support the channel and hit the like button to let YouTube know where the good stuff is. This whole idea came about from a trip to the zoo, specifically the gift shop at the zoo. But more about that later. To start with, I would need a base. I always save a few scraps of wood from other projects, so I grabbed a couple of offcuts and glued them together. Just some wood glue and some small screws are all that was needed to quickly fix this into place. Onto this base, I cut and glued a few blocks of XPS modelling foam. This would serve two purposes. It would be a material that I could easily carve into shape, and it would also act as a soft base for me to push plants into later. There are many ways to shape this foam. Here, I have attached a wire brush to my Dremel, and I'm just loosely whipping over the foam to create some texture. This only needs to be really rough, as most of this will be covered in the next step. Now, if you are familiar with my channel, you will know that at this stage I would normally reach for a bag of sculptor mould, a firm favourite modelling material of mine. But I had just run out, so I thought I would take this opportunity to run you guys through a simple and cheap way of making your own. Firstly, you need a roll of toilet paper, then rip this into lots of small pieces. And yes, this step takes a while, but that's the trade-off, I guess. And now just soak it in a little warm water, and then add some plaster, and it behaves pretty much like sculptor mould. Just smear it on and slowly build up some shapes to create rocks and cliff faces. Now once this was dry, I wanted to seal this layer as the plaster in the mix is very absorbent. So I paint everything with a layer of Mod Podge. This is similar to PVA glue and basically acts as a sealer and primer all in one. Onto this I then paint a very watered down grey to soak into all those little nooks and crevices. I also mixed up some ground texture. This can basically be made of anything you choose, depending on the texture you want to create. But today I'm using some sand, some sticks and some small stones. I had a bit of paint and also a good dollop of glue to bind everything together. And I remember when I first started modelling, I used to be so afraid to get these ground textures wrong that I would be riddled with anxiety and often just end up confused. Now, as the years have passed, I realised that pretty much anything can be put into a texture mix like this, as long as you add a binder, something like PVA glue. So, get creative. See what weird and wonderful things you can find to add to your texture mixes, and let me know your favourite recipes in the comments below. Once dry, I came in with some brown and black ink on the rock face to start to build up some details. I also added some lighter browns to give a bit of natural colour variation. And while I had the paintbrush out, I also went around the outside of the model with some black paint to clean up all the edges a bit. I found some fun little architectural models in my local craft store. I gave them a quick coat of primer with my airbrush. Whilst this was drying, I set about making the basis of my jungle. I had some plastic palm trees left over from a previous project, but the tops of these were completely the wrong scale for what I wanted, so I decided to make my own. I had some green card that I would use to create some of these palm leaves. I cut the card into some thin strips. I then cut this card into even smaller strips. I fold the strip in half and then cut out a rough leaf shape, using the trunk of the palm as a rough guide to judge the size. It was at this stage that I realised that this task would be a real patience tester, but here we are. Next, I used a sharp craft knife to make loads of tiny little cuts into the leaf. I then fold these back on themselves to really give them the shape of a leaf. I also found that giving the leaf a bit of a ruffle along the outside helped break up the edges a bit and give the leaves that sort of windswept look. Then it was just a matter of rinse and repeat, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat. As I said, I had some palm tree trunks from a previous project which were about the right scale. Now I wanted a really lively jungle full of vegetation, so I ordered a bunch of plastic plants from Amazon. These are mostly cheap and cheerful, but with a bit of searching you can find some plants that have a little bit of detail to them. I picked up a bag of these yucca looking plants, and also some little shrubs. I also found some bamboo in various sizes. Now you could use these straight from the packet, but I hate the sort of waxy plastic look that you get from them, so I always choose to paint them. Sure, this is a bit more work, but you can really control the colour this way and unify a colour scheme between all the different plants, which helps tie everything together. I pushed them all into little scraps of foam ready for painting. I then primed these all production line style. And while I had my airbrush out, I gave my figure a little dusting of white from above. A super simple way to introduce quick shadows and details into your model. I also had some paper plants from Green Stuff World and Grey McGrath. Now, these look cool, but I wanted to see how they actually work. Now, tip number 1. If you are going to paint them, do not do what I did and cut them all out. Leave them on the sheets, as they will be much easier to deal with. To paint all of these on both sides was now a bit of a challenge. but all I could do was keep telling myself that it would be worth it in the end. I then went about painting all my plastic plants. By using my airbrush, I was able to build up lots of variation in tone. The eye always looks for patterns, so by creating variation within each plant, and then also from one plant to the next, I was able to avoid that same repeating pattern. Now this is a key element to trying to create realistic foliage. I went back and forth, adding different colours to all the different plants, trying to recreate what some of these plants would look like in real life. Now some of them are actually modelled on real life plants, so you can look up the real life version as a reference. Next came the thing that sparked the whole idea in the first place. A trip to the zoo gift shop, where I found this super cool model of a T-Rex. And no T-Rex diorama would be complete without a giant footprint. So I spread out some plaster and pressed the foot of the T-Rex model into it. I cleaned this up a little further with a little wooden stick just to help define the shape clearly. It was then time to begin to glue up my palm trees. Now this would be a real test to see if all my hard work and patience cutting the leaves was worth it. I just glued these on with a tiny little dot of hot glue. I slowly worked my way around each tree. I calculated that about 20 leaves per tree was sufficient. So, 5 trees was 100 leaves. Yay! I then bent all the leaves into shape, and to my surprise, it turned out great. Sure, it was a bit labour intensive, but in my opinion it was definitely worth it, and something that I may use going forward. I gave all of these a little spritz with a bit of paint. I sprayed a lighter yellowy green near the stems to signify new growth. I then also touch in some of the ends of the leaves with some brown, as if just the tips had died a little. And finally, I had a whole menu of jungle plants ready for my diorama. I positioned the T-Rex model on my base, as I could then work all the plants around it. I had a few old roots that I'd saved from my garden, and used these to begin to shape the composition. I carefully used a hot glue gun here, as it allows me to work really quickly, as the glue dries almost instantly. I keep adding little bits of root here and there until I was happy. It was fun to create a mini story with the roots. Okay, well, this root starts here, and if I add this little bit, then that could connect up to that part, and this part could connect to that part, that sort of thing. A welcome relief to the never-ending task of cutting leaves. I glued down my palm trees by drilling into the ground with a small pin vise. And then it was just a case of adding plants in random and varied ways, so to avoid those patterns I mentioned before. Make a small hole and then a dot of glue, and then push the plant in. I had to use tweezers in some areas which were difficult to reach. At first it won't look like much, but the more and more you add, the more it begins to really come to life. This is one of those times where, rather than less is more is definitely more. After a recent trip to Brazil, I was amazed by the sheer volume of plants growing everywhere, and I wanted to bring some of that first-hand experience into this build. Once I had a good base established, I could set about gluing up some of my paper plants. The same principle as the palm trees, but in this case I used a small bit of wooden stick as a stem to glue onto. I did this with all my paper plants and began to add them to my diorama, using them more as feature plants to really sell the idea of a jungle. I also had a little bit of moss I had preserved a long time ago in some glycerin. This worked out great, and I think I'll do a video on how to preserve real plants to use in your diorama soon, because it's a great trick to know. Now this moss works great as a little space filler between plants to really flesh out that feeling of a thick jungle. I used the end of a pencil to help me get into some of those even more tight spaces, and also protected my fingers from being burned with the hot glue. I also had a little bottle of water effects, which I added to the footprint and a couple of little other places where puddles could have formed. I painted up my figures and began to play around with the little stories that could be playing out in my scene. One of the models looked like she was taking a selfie. So I created a story around her being unaware of the dangers she's in, whilst the others are just running for their lives. Oh, how my weird and wonderful mind works. Thank you for joining me on this journey today. I hope you have found some of the tips useful in this video, and I hope it gives you a few ideas about how to create a realistic jungle. If you have enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe to stay up to date with all the latest content. And I thank you all for your continued amazing support, and I always love reading all your comments. It really makes me smile to hear your ideas. Happy building, and I'll see you in the next one. Enjoy.
Okay, I'm coming. Just let me take a selfie.